everyone. It's John with Dan Edmonds again, and we're going to do a top five worst and the best of the remakes versus the originals we've watched so far. We'll probably periodically do this, maybe like in another year or so. Before we get into what they are and stuff like that, my methodology was to kind of basically do a bake off between the different choices. So I would just kind of go down the list and like okay, is this better? Is this worse? Is this better? Is this worse? And stuff like that. So it's very kind of brute force method for me and stuff like that. And then ultimately it kind of resulted what it results. Dan, you want to talk a little bit about your process?
My process was very similar. The top five best are just based on my sheer admiration for the filmmakers. My top five worst, because we watched so many bad movies in the last year and a half or so, I had to really think about the ones that not only were bad and tedious to watch, but also that made me really personally angry. There's something about them that really annoyed me. So these will be the ones that really kind of were painful to watch and really took it out of me when I watched them.
Okay.
So, and to make this more fun, what we've done is we've written them on paper and we will reveal them in our very high-tech methodology, as you'll see.
Right. Alrighty, so with that, I have to say that for my worst one is kind of a odd kind of connection, because it also was by the same filmmaker who made the one of the best remakes.
Right.
And so mine is Rollerball.
Well, mine is Black Christmas.
Oh, interesting.
My number five.
So
however,
okay.
well, yeah, okay. I'll let you go on this one then.
So for me, it's the kind of, besides the fact that Chris Klein is by far no James Caan, it basically stripped the substance from the original, and it went off on this kind of basically went off the rail. Not only budget wise, but everything else, including the crazy boings in the middle of the chase scene and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the original is this movie about the dangers of corporate control, corporations ruling all parts of our lives, and completely devoid of responsibility and controlling the flow of information to ensure there's this class divide. That sounds a little familiar perhaps. And they basically, with the remake, they turned that into an extreme sports vacation movie with terrible accents all round. Weird set pieces using night vision, and a fleeting glance of Rebecca Romijn's nudity. Yes. So there we go. That was the only redeeming feature of the movie for me, really.
But that wasn't your worst, though. So
that was not my worst. My worst was probably Black Christmas, the remake from 2019. The original was this bleak, claustrophobic prototype slasher movie where there's this random cruelty inflicted on the characters, with these teenage girls isolated from their parents and the dangers of some random intruder sort of killing them. This is replaced in the remake by compounding the slasher genre with some commentary on the misogyny in academia in a very sort of weird way. And how does it do this? By having a group of jocks who want to both control women but also kill them. Because if they just wanted to do one or the other, then it wouldn't be a comment on misogynistic behavior in academia, I guess. Because it doesn't make any sense why you want to either control them or kill them, but who do you kill and who do you control? They never really kind of resolve that. And there's other sort of great lessons in this movie, like don't trust people who aren't on social media, don't trust Uber drivers, and you're definitely going to have any videos of you having sex with your boyfriend uploaded to the internet. All worthy lessons there. And of course, just the general, it was like a bad long episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I thought.
Right. Black Christmas was further up my list, but definitely to me, like, it's one of the great examples of how, making social commentary doesn't give you a free pass to have bad writing. I mean, that's even if you have like kind of quote unquote original ideas, it's got to have some kind of coherency. It's got to have some kind of ability to kind of hold the audience attention and make them want to like kind of stick around for the hour and a half plus and stuff.
I think those quote unquotes you just used were giving it a lot of more benefit of the doubt. But yeah, and of course there is also the a bow and arrow is a really good practical weapon to be used in close quarter combat.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, that was my number 5.
Alrighty. So let's next up on the list, reveal here. So for me, the next one was Pink Panther.
Oh, number 4. Okay. Mine was Shall We Dance?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So for me, like the well-earned Razzie says it all. I mean, Steve Martin and Kevin Kline are great, comedic actors, but somehow, like, they got pulled into this pile of poo and they were stuck with it and stuff. Definitely, if you want to watch any remakes, or anything close to anything worth watching the Pink Panther, just jump to the follow-ups, the sequels to the original, and you'll be much better off.
Yeah, I'll save what I'm going to say for Pink Panther for further up my list, as you can imagine. Shall We Dance? I think what really irked me about this remake was, one, it was boring, and there was lots of kind of dialogue of Richard Gere just talking to himself for quite a large portion of the movie. The dancing was nowhere near as good. It lacked whilst the original had all this really funny commentary on dance classes themselves and the quirks of those particular personalities that you tend to find, and that was actually quite true to life of those personalities, and this the really funny physical comedy, and some of the, I don't know, I suppose you could say genuinely moving scenes, and this unrequited love that goes sort of all the way through it. It just had so much charm, and it was just replaced by this very dull version that was just unfunny. The dialogue was terrible. J-Lo was like a cardboard cutout, and she did a bit of dancing, but I mean, aside from that, I felt absolutely no interest in her as a character whatsoever. But it lacked all of the quirkiness and charm of all the side characters as well.
Yeah.
And again, just Richard Gere was just very, very bland in this role. So it just annoyed me that they lost all this comedic spirit of the original and made something very sort of by the numbers and dull.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like kind of both Richard Gere and J-Lo were just walking through it. I mean, it just, I mean, it's a combination of, what we'll talk about again and again coming up with stuff, with the MTV effect, and just like basically, a remake as to what was the point ultimately, right? Like, kind of, I mean, that's the question I found myself, when you find yourself asking that after, either in the middle or after watching a remake, that's usually not a very good sign.
After about 20 minutes, if you find yourself looking at your phone for something more interesting to do, this is a real waste of your life. But yeah.
No.
So I guess let's see what's next.
Alrighty,
moving along.
So my next pick is actually pretty recent that we just watched, so that should be a clue.
I think I know what it is, and I think mine might actually be the same. Or maybe not.
Children of the Corn.
Of the Corn, yes.
Alrighty. Yeah. I mean, something I think we both kind of really, bugged us about was like the fact that like they thought they were fixing what was a bug of the original, not, having adults and kid roles. But in actuality, it was one of the best features. I mean, the creepiness of John Franklin as Isaac was, like one of the things that made the original memorable. But they made things worse, and then of course they had the endless dialogue that seems to just drag out this sci-fi miniseries.
Yeah, I mean, if your idea of a scary movie is to watch couples argue for about half an hour, then this is the movie for you. you know, it took this original which starts with these two children trying to come to grips with all of their society that's been destroyed, all their role models gone by this conspiracy of children that have kind of taken over, and they've just replaced it with sort of really badly acted killer children, and who don't really have anything more than pose as the bad guys. There's no real sort of trying to understand how they got there,
right,
what the challenges are really, except for maybe a bit of teenage pregnancy. And it replaces it with a Marine just killing hordes of children, you know, which is just very strange. And I mean, I suppose you have to sort of admire its, you know, deviation from conventional forms of taste in movies by having a grown man just butchering children. And also it has a very simulated, I should say, teen sex scene on a church altar.
Yeah.
It's kind of thrown in there as well. I'm kind of making this sound quite good actually. And it's not, it's terrible. So don't watch it, would be my advice.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty solid advice. So we already kind of talked about, you know, my next pick, which is, you know, Black Christmas and stuff. So
yeah, let's hear what you've surely you've got something to share in terms of what you disliked about Black Christmas.
I mean, pretty much, you know, I more or less kind of covered what I thought was the kind of the worst parts about it. And you definitely covered, you know, kind of really, you know, kind of the other key parts. You know, so I don't really have much to add to kind of just what made it really bad. I think the only kind of other thing I can kind of mention was Carrie, what's his name? The actor that was the Elvis, I guess. I mean, again, like he's definitely done some better work. I mean, he had to have, you know, since you know, Princess Bride, stuff like that. So to see him in kind of like this really bizarre kind of you know, role as the kind of ringleader, stuff like that, was again like kind of just a waste of talent. And that's probably like another thing that we run into with these bad remakes is just like when you really use actors and roles that they're just really, I mean, they're better used elsewhere, stuff like that. But then again, a paycheck is a paycheck, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah.
So moving on our number one.
Or number
worst,
two. Oh no, was
okay,
Black Christmas your?
Black that
Christmas
was my number two. So
okay.
Yeah.
I've got a treat for you then. My number two is It Happened One Christmas. the remake of It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
Which is a very tepid. They've taken a very classic piece of cinema, and they've made a very tepid, low budget TV movie out of it. That basically loses any kind of grit and substance by removing any of the sort of children being hit or the struggles of the relationship, and just replaces it with a very, very bland and boring, almost, what was it, like 2.5 hours, 3 hours or something like this. Even Orson Welles, one of the greatest living actors in cinema history, cannot save this movie from being mind-numbingly dull. And then just to top it all off, once you've completely bored, we get introduced to Clara Oddbody, which is one of the most unfortunate English accents I've ever experienced. And the fact of her sort of referencing Charles Dickens and saying, oh, it's a brand new novel, you've got to read this. Although she says it in, I can't reproduce it because she says it in such an odd manner. It's just, as someone from England, I find her accent, you know, insulting almost to the point of, you know, outrage. I mean, if it was me, and of course they stop Mary Bailey, the lead lady in this, from drinking in this. It's like we can't have a woman drunk on screen in the remake of It's Wonderful Life. My recommendation of how they should have fixed this movie is that when Clara Oddbody is drowning, Mary Bailey should have had a few swigs, pushed her under the ice, held her there, and then gone to the bar, got absolutely hammered, crashed her car, and then Silent Night, Deadly Night, taken an axe to Potter. And that would have made this movie considerably better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, probably, it happened one Christmas was just a combination of all the different sins we talk about with remakes. Like, why make this remake? Gender swap just for its own sake, and taking out all the kind of parts that made the original, like you said, something that had life and made it into a pretty bland TV dinner that you served up, like just something to kind of sit in front of and stupefy for an hour or so and stuff, and again, like what was I mean, I guess maybe like there was a certain different times in history where we had to fill airtime, like kind of to basically have commercials. So I guess that's probably the main purpose that like shows like this serve and stuff. And then I guess there was even something about like that they didn't officially get the rights or something like that, because I guess like It's a Wonderful Life ended in or became public domain because they didn't renew it and stuff like that. So maybe I guess that's how they got away with it, like where they didn't get sued for ripping off a classic.
Yeah, something should be done to the people that remade this, whether they're sued or not. Some sort of physical harm, preferably. But anyway, so your number one.
Okay, here we go. Number one, and it's also like yet another relatively recent watch. Amityville Horror.
Amityville Horror, yes.
Once again, the MTV effect of plugging attractive stars just doesn't make this any better. And having Ryan Reynolds go shirtless, after he was shredding for Deadpool may be attractive to some of the audience, but the rest of us are just like kind of ready to tune out. So once again, we see also that horror is a lot more than jump scares and special effects.
I think for me, this is really odd because at the start of the movie, you're supposed to be sort of ogling Ryan Reynolds topless and sweaty. So he's kind of attractive. And then towards the end, he's supposed to be scary because his face appears in shot very suddenly. It's like Ryan Reynolds' face just suddenly appearing in shot is not that scary, really. That was what at least like the last half an hour of the movie was. Well, the jump scares were just Ryan Reynolds' face. And yeah, I mean, it pretty much sort of fails on that basis. And I mean, as a character, he's completely unlikable in this movie. And you have absolutely no sympathy for him.
Right.
And you kind of, just wished he died, really, in it after watching it. And of course, there's the other thing that the original was made shortly after the book came out. So there was still this sort of question of, oh, is this real or is it not real? Whereas this is so far after the fact, and you know that it's fake, that it's kind of you're already setting off on a pretty. You removed half the tension of the original just by doing that. So yeah. Well, then my number one will be Pink Panther. I think what this film accomplishes for me is that Steve Martin manages to humiliate himself, Peter Sellers, and of any fan of either of them with this movie. It's just an unfunny, tired mess. It's just the worst, possible kind of debasement of a classic, really, that there is, in my opinion. And it manages to destroy my childhood whilst watching it. That's about the only thing that it really does effectively. It's just replaced genius level, improvised sort of masterful physical comedy with just the worst kind of crap, really. I mean, it's just terrible, awful.
It's amazing how sometimes these movies just keep on coming and stuff, and certainly it'll be interesting to see like kind of a year from now, like kind of what we put on, whether we have some additions or changes to our 5 worst so far and stuff.
And not to sort of like ice this cake too heavily, but I've had dental work that was more enjoyable than this movie, in all honesty.
Ouch. Alrighty. So, well, shall we get into the 5 best, so then that way we can kind of purge ourselves a little bit?
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So my number 5 pick for the best of the best here.
I should point out to viewers, I pre-wrote mine on paper because I was not as confident as John in my ability to coherently write letters in an order.
Definitely sense. Not confidence. So.
The Fly.
The Fly.
Okay. Oh, mine was actually Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Oh, nice.
My number 5. Yeah, so The Fly.
So for me, it's, even though it's the most mainstream of David Cronenberg's work, it takes a classic 1950s B movie and turns it into, something much more. I mean, not only do we have something that was a hit in the 1980s and stuff like that, but, ultimately it's going to stand the test of time as, something that really, is a love story that's, tragic. And then meanwhile, there's commentary about science pushing its boundaries and stuff. And so overall, it's got just almost like all the best things that you would want in a remake and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, it's both movies, both the original and the remake, are about this ambition and how it can kind of transform us into something that's kind of inhuman. But I think what's so good about the David Cronenberg one is that it really goes into detail, not only with effects, but also the psychological states. You have this kind of hubris of scientific triumph, followed by this kind of tragedy of the body falling apart and failing. And then the sort of acceptance that you're now something that's outside of normality, but this is now your life. And then ultimately this kind of, like you said, the tragedy of, having to kill someone that you love in this kind of epic kind of love story. Yeah. That kind of weird compassion, and all with really gross effects.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I gotta also give it to Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum. Yeah. As like kind of just awesome acting, like Goldblum with his quirkiness, and Gina Davis as kind of like we really see the heart in her, like through her, and also like kind of just the fact that like the heartbreak, like kind of that watching somebody you love fall apart, and and you ultimately like kind of have to help to end their life and stuff like that. I mean, it just, she really carries that drama and stuff like that.
Yeah, and along with loads of dark, really dark humor as well.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah, it's excellent. Yeah, I picked Dirty Rotten Scoundrels as my number 5 because I just think it's just it takes what is a fairly mediocre original and really just adds a whole load of masterful comedic performances, really sharp dialogue, just some great physical comedy by Steve Martin. So you can see I'm actually a fan of his, and even though he did Pink Panther. And it's just one of those movies that's kind of clever. If you don't know the twist, it actually sort of keeps you guessing. Michael Caine is just, he deviates between being quite vaguely sort of menacing, but also very funny and charming at the same time. It's just a lot of fun. It's just one of those movies you can just rewatch happily again and again, really.
Definitely. Yeah, my choice of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is a little bit up the list, so I'll kind of talk more about it then. But definitely like all the things you mentioned, and like I said, I'll cover more when it's next up on my list. So next for the number 4.
Okay.
Alrighty.
It's a long one.
Yep. Invasion of the Body
Snatchers. Okay, then. Mine was Showgirls as a remake of 42nd Street.
So you got to talk about Showgirls first.
Yeah, well, I mean, why I think it's such a good remake because it does take a lot of the original ideas of showing the less sort of nice side of the entertainment industry and what goes on in the background, the politics, how people are exploited, and their particular sort of journeys and this sort of ambition with the people who don't make it. So it takes a lot of those sort of core elements, it throws it into a spicier setting of Las Vegas, and but I think for me it just has this very kind of weird dream-like sort of quality that makes it hyper real. It's this sort of you don't really know what's going on in the movie from one moment to the next. Your attention is constantly being drawn to something, be it good or bad, and there's a weird sort of artificiality about the sexuality in it that's sort of oddly unpleasant most of the time. And I mean it's just I don't know how to I think I described it as kind of like the ayahuasca trip of a movie, in that it's sort of both sort of mind-blowing and sort of quite traumatic at the same time, as opposed to, you know, say something by Alejandro Jodorowsky, which would be like sort of an acid trip of a movie. So yeah, for me it's a pretty amazing cinematic achievement in many respects.
I mean, for me, it was definitely one of those movies that, like, you have this impression, or you have your ideas about it going into it, and it really kind of I mean, I just really didn't know, or thought I knew what to expect, but then ultimately found out that, like, there was just a lot more to it and stuff like that. And it's part of it too was like simply also watching that documentary about, you know, You Don't Know Me and stuff like that, and that also kind of, for me, like, you know, gave me like kind of opened my eyes to like kind of really some of the different possibilities of it. You know, particularly again that one woman who it really touched and like kind of made a difference in her life and stuff like that. And so for me, this is a big statement on is how, like, ultimately, regardless of our list and all that kind of stuff, that, you know, beauty, you know, like kind of is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, it's, you know, like ultimately what may be a classic to us and stuff like that may be, you know, to somebody's worst list, I guess, and stuff, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's one of those strange movies where, you know, Elizabeth Berkley's role, it completely defined her life, albeit in not a particularly positive way. Although depends on your view of the movie. Someone can see it as a really amazing performance. I mean, I just think the whole thing is kind of amazing and terrible all at the same time. So that's kind of why I love that movie. But yeah, great fun all round.
Alrighty.
And you had Invasion of Body Snatchers.
Oh yes. So for me, like, you know, just like The Fly, where like the director denies that there's any connection to McCarthyism and communism and stuff. Which again, like, that's what's funny about some of these movies is that, like, we have these ideas of like kind of what it's about and all that, but in the end, it's still about the paranoia. And the 1970s remake, you know, of this just captured it in just ways that, like, you know, the original didn't, you know, like kind of. I mean, it took basically the remake took the best of the original, and it not only made it for modern audience and stuff, but it just, you know, created, you know, kind of all the things in a even more powerful way that, like, just I think paved the way for like films like The Thing and stuff.
Yeah, I think it, because of the expanded scale of the remake and focusing perhaps more on the psychology of the characters and their interrelationships, just makes it more powerful. Yeah, and of course, just the sort of, again, you've got like the body horror effects, like of, you know, as we in The Fly, our bodies kind of betraying us and almost sort of eating us from the inside out in a way, is you know, literally in both of those movies. And so yeah, well, shall we let's so my number 3 was The Fly, and we've already talked about that.
Yeah. So, and mine was I got a quick erasing. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and likewise we already talked about that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
for me, the only other thing that I had to add is the fact that yeah, I mean, it's basically um, just the adding the or combining Steve Martin and Michael Caine was comic gold and stuff like that. There's this kind of the odd couple kind of humor and everything. At the same time, their chemistry just really just added something more that you didn't have the original. Um, and yeah, it's just another example of like kind of the remake, offspring kind of outshining the parents to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, we should mention the original had David Niven and Marlon
Oh
Brando.
yeah.
Now that was an odd couple, and it was not an odd couple that really worked that well on screen. I
Mm.
didn't think. It was. I mean, Marlon Brando's a good actor. I don't know if he's a great comedic actor, but yeah, I mean, it had some quite nice lines and things like this. But yeah, nothing in the same ballpark as the remake.
No. Cool.
All right. So number two.
Two.
Mine was, as we've already talked about, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah. And mine was The Thing. Dun, dun, dun.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this is another example of like kind of the remake outshining the original. And similarly, you have a B movie from the 50s and stuff that John Carpenter was really at his prime when he kind of took a cast with folks like Kurt Russell. And again, despite the denial of the kind of AIDS connection, stuff like that, it still just has that kind of feeling of like you were saying about kind of body horror and also just the paranoia, like kind of this mix of like disease and alien invasion being kind of the threat and stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's a great segue to mine because my number one was The Thing, and yeah, I mean I think you're absolutely right. It takes a 50s invasion movie, sort of alien invasion movie, but then sort of cleverly refocuses it onto a small group of people that are completely isolated. And I think what's clever is because The Thing infects people physically. We're talking about this kind of bodies betraying themselves, the potential sort of AIDS connection, be it denied or not, whatever. But by having it in the Antarctic and them being very close to each other, it heightens the tension and the danger because they all have to, be in close proximity with each other. I mean, also there's this idea that by having them all at this research station, it's implied that they know each other very, very well and they've spent a long time with each other. So that kind of heightens this sense of betrayal when they actually get infected and when they also have to, a bit like in The Fly, they've got to kind of take out people they've known for a long time. So again, this paranoia of how well do you know the people around you is really heightened. And I think just this whole idea of like, your body not only betraying you, but actually becoming a weapon that contorts your body into something that kills other people is really, really amazing. And of course, there's fantastic music by John Carpenter. It's such an iconic soundtrack. It's beautifully shot and just amazing effects. So yeah,
definitely. And also like again, I think there's another one right where he did the score. I think that was
he did. Yeah.
And his movies, the fact that like he scores it and like does such a great job at it is also kind of just clearly shows like when he's in his element, he definitely shines. So.
Definitely.
So before I reveal my number one, I thought I'd kind of do some honorable mentions. For me, it was we talked about Karate Kid and just what they've done with the Cobra Kai series and stuff. Westworld also, give or take the more recent seasons of stuff, like kind of was a real surprise in season one, and like two to some degree, something like that. Watchmen was also one that we really kind of, for me, like I mean, I was just blown away by what they've done with that. David Lindelof, of course, kind of leading his crew on that one.
I mean, I like Brave New World as well. I thought that was a really interesting sort of remake. I would say a lot of those ones were just the TV remakes. They're often sort of slightly different in that Watchmen is a sort of a sequel and Cobra Kai is a sort of a sequel as well. Westworld is really, I guess, the only, if we're being strict about the terms, a kind of a
Right,
remake of the original,
right.
but very good. But I mean, all of them well worth a watch and very, very good. So
Definitely. And the other ones I kind of thought were worth mentioning was Magnificent Seven versus Seven Samurai. Just
yeah,
kind of two classics in their own right. And
well,
finally, go
there is
ahead.
definitely one in terms of that, the worst that we forgot to mention, and that is
Uh-huh.
the Seven Magnificent Gladiators, which was a low budget Italian remake
Right.
of the Magnificent Seven, with very poorly dubbed performances
Mm.
and a strange glowing phallic sword and some sort of women wrestling topless in it and things like this. So that was actually more fun than any of the five that I mentioned, I think, to watch. So I couldn't really include it.
And the flip side of that was Hawk the Slayer, which the
Ah, yeah,
directors themselves said that it was a remake of Yojimbo, which of course we found out it wasn't.
no,
And in reality, not only was it like kind of unofficial quote unquote remake of Seven Samurai and stuff like that, it just was really surprising, kind of how fun it is. Like kind of that like even to this day, like like rewatching it like years later, there's just little elements to it that like kind of make it where it's one of those kind of cases where you can have a cult classic with a what can others may consider like a bad remake and stuff.
yeah, absolutely. So your number one.
Okay, so my number one was the Thomas Crown Affair, and it's just basically an example of like kind of or it's a funny, ironic example that here, kind of John McTiernan, who actually did the remake of, Rollerball, also, made one of the worst. Also made this, which to me is like one of the best remakes. It's just simply a fun heist movie that's just as rewatchable as James Bond movies. Um, and I think part of why that happened was the fact that like it's Pierce Brosnan's own production company. I think he kind of really clicked on the idea that like if we just make a Bondish kind of movie that's kind of fun, people will probably like it and stuff. And I think he was right. On the other hand, it's shows that like basically filmmaking can be like herding cats. Where on the one hand, you have to like chase the audience and stuff like that, and the other like you also have to chase all the pieces like funding, writing, putting together a production team that kind of gels together and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I just had to put Showgirls in there, otherwise it probably would have made my top five as well. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's nice. It's got really great dialogue. There's fantastic chemistry between Rene Russo and Pierce Brosnan. It's pacey. It's not dull. The set pieces visually, it's very interesting. I love all the references to sort of classical art in it. It's just a really fun time and a great soundtrack as well.
Definitely. I mean, I think some of these, last examples are just, shows you how you don't have to do shot by shot, kind of the original stuff like that. And then for that matter, ideally, you do something more with it, something that kind of, surprises us and delights us and stuff like that. And it can be really fun. I mean, remakes doesn't have to mean that like we have to have, kind of serious social commentary now and stuff, like different times you can just have a fun movie that people will want to watch and then rewatch and stuff, and that will be like kind of part of the point.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a delicate balance between finding something new to add, but without sort of going completely off into ridiculous territory.
Yes.
I mean, I guess my advice to any filmmakers thinking about remaking anything is like, if the dialogue and the set pieces would be good to stand by themselves, then it's probably going to be a good remake. If not, then perhaps don't bother.
No. Alrighty, so that was just a kind of a fun thing for us to do on this episode. We're going to continue our Stephen King look. Coming up, we are going to cover The Shining, and down the road we'll be looking at actually another one that we are looking forward to is the kind of Godzilla versions of remakes. To kind of continue our look at the Japanese kaiju in what's it called, in preparation for the Godzilla versus King Kong movie that's coming out. And so, yeah, that's us again for the remakes versus originals. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.